The hospital room in Chicago was a sterile cocoon of white, the kind of white that swallowed sound and sharpened pain. Sarah Torres lay propped against the thin pillows, her body aching from the C-section that had brought her daughter into the world just hours ago. The baby, swaddled in a pale pink blanket, slept against her chest, a tiny warm weight that anchored Sarah to the moment. Her dark curls clung to her sweat-dampened forehead, and her brown skin glistened under the fluorescent lights. She was exhausted, raw, but there was a quiet triumph in her eyes as she traced the curve of her daughter's cheek. She had done it. She had brought life into the world. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Sarah's heart lifted, expecting the nurse. But it was Michael, her husband. His tailored suit was crisp, his blonde hair neatly combed, but his face, God, his face was wrong. Cold, distant, like a stranger wearing her husband's skin. And then she saw her, Julia, his assistant, trailing behind him like a shadow. Her blonde hair caught the light, her red lips curled into something too sharp to be a smile. Sarah's breath hitched the air in the room suddenly too thin. "Sarah," Michael said, his voice clipped professional, as if he were closing a business deal. "I'm sorry, but I need to talk to you." She clutched her daughter tighter, the baby stirring slightly but not waking. Now her voice was hoarse, frayed from the hours of labor, the pain still fresh in her bones. "Michael, I just gave birth. Can't this wait?" He didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he glanced at Julia, who stood with her arms crossed, her manicured nails tapping against her elbow. "No," he said. "It can't." Sarah's stomach twisted, a cold dread pooling inside her. She'd known something was wrong for months. The late nights, the clipped conversations, the way his touch had grown perfunctory like a chore. But she'd told herself it was stress, that his real estate empire demanded too much of him. She'd told herself they'd find their way back to each other, especially now with their daughter here. But the way he stood there unyielding told her she'd been wrong. "Sarah," he said again, and this time his voice carried a finality that made her heart stutter. "I want a divorce. Julia's pregnant." The words landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The room seemed to tilt, the beeping of the heart monitor beside her daughter's bassinet, growing louder, sharper, like a metronome counting down to the end of her world. Julia pregnant. Julia, who had been in their home at their dinner parties, who had laughed at Sarah's jokes and complimented her sketches. Julia, who had been a fixture in Michael's life, always a little too close, a little too familiar. Sarah's eyes darted to the woman who met her gaze with a cool, almost pitying look. Pregnant, Sarah repeated the word, tasting like ash. She looked at Michael, searching for something. Regret. Shame, anything. But his face was a mask, his blue eyes empty of the man she'd married. "You're doing this now?" "Here, I didn't want to drag it out," he said, shifting his weight. "It's better to be honest." "Honest?" The word came out as a bitter laugh, sharp enough to cut. "You call this honest? You bring her here to my hospital room while I'm holding our daughter, and you think that's honest?" Julia stepped forward, her heels clicking on the linoleum. She placed a manila folder on the bedside table, the divorce papers stark against the sterile surface. "We'll make sure you're taken care of financially," she said, her voice smooth, practiced like she was offering a consolation prize. "Sign the papers, Sarah. It's better for everyone if you move on." Sarah's vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from the hot tears welling in her eyes. She didn't look at the papers. She couldn't. Instead, she looked at her daughter, at the tiny rise and fall of her chest, at the way her lips parted in a soft, trusting breath. This was her world now, this small, perfect life in her arms. Michael and Julia could take everything else, the house, the money, the life she'd built with him, but they couldn't take this. I don't need your money, Sarah said, her voice low, steady, despite the tremor in her hands. I don't need anything from either of you. Just leave. Michael hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment she thought he might say something, might show a flicker of the man who had once promised her forever. But he only nodded a curt, businesslike gesture and turned toward the door. Julia followed her hand, brushing his arm in a way that made Sarah's stomach churn. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence that followed was deafening. Sarah let the tears come, then hot and silent, falling onto the pink blanket. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, breathing in the soft new scent of her. We're going to be okay, she whispered, though the words felt like a prayer more than a promise. Just you and me. 3 days later, Sarah stepped into the mansion on Lake Michigan, her daughter cradled in a carrier against her chest. The house was too big, too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplified absence. Michael's closet was empty, his cologne no longer lingering in the air. The marble countertops gleamed untouched, and the framed photos of their wedding had been removed from the mantel. All that remained was a check for $50,000 on the kitchen island, pinned beneath a note in his sharp, efficient handwriting. Start over. Good luck. Sarah stared at the check, her fingers itching to tear it to pieces. $50,000. As if money could erase the years she'd spent loving him, the dreams she'd poured into this house, this life. She let it fall to the floor, the paper fluttering like a dead leaf. She didn't need his pity. She didn't need his guilt. She needed to keep moving, to keep breathing, for the sake of the child in her arms. That night, after putting her daughter to bed in the nursery, she'd designed herself pale blue walls with hand-painted stars. She opened her old laptop. The screen flickered, the battery warning blinking red, but it still worked. She pulled up her design software, her fingers trembling as she sketched. It was a small project, a freelance gig for a local cafe, but it was something. A start. The hours slipped away, the moonlight spilling through the window as she worked, her daughter's soft breaths a steady rhythm in the background. She didn't notice when she fell asleep, her head resting on the keyboard, the screen still glowing with half-finished lines. The next morning, a knock at the door startled her awake. It was Michael's mother, Ellen, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes soft, with something like regret. She held a casserole dish, the kind of gesture that felt both kind and inadequate. I heard what happened, Ellen said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He's a fool, Sarah. An absolute fool. Sarah managed a tired smile, setting the casserole on the counter. I'm not sure what to say to that. You don't have to say anything, Ellen said, her voice firm. Just keep going. You're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. Show him. Show them all. The words stayed with Sarah, a small spark in the darkness. She spent the next weeks in a blur of sleepless nights and relentless work. She took every freelance job she could find, designing logos, drafting floor plans, anything to keep the bills paid. Her daughter became her shadow, sleeping in a bassinet beside her desk, waking for feedings that blurred into the early hours. There were moments when the weight of it all threatened to crush her, when the fridge was nearly empty, when the heating bill came due, when she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back. But she kept going, driven by the fierce, unyielding love for her child. One snowy morning, Sarah bundled her daughter into a carrier and took the train to downtown Chicago. The Walker Tower loomed ahead, a sleek monolith of glass and steel, home to Walker Innovations, a tech giant known for its cutting-edge designs. She'd applied for a junior architect position on a whim, never expecting a callback. But they'd asked for an interview, and she wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. Her coat was frayed at the cuffs, her portfolio slightly creased, but she straightened her shoulders and walked into the lobby, her daughter's warmth against her chest, giving her courage. The elevator ride was a blur, the numbers climbing too fast. When the doors opened, she stepped out, her boots slipping slightly on the polished floor. She was early, but her nerves made her clumsy, and as she adjusted the carrier, she stumbled. A strong hand caught her arm, steadying her before she could fall. "Are you okay?" The voice was deep calm with a trace of concern. Sarah looked up, her breath catching. The man was tall, his dark hair streaked with premature gray, his eyes a piercing green that seemed to see right through her. He wore a tailored coat, but there was something unpretentious about him, something that made her feel seen. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm here for an interview. I need this job. I can design draft work late, whatever it takes." He studied her for a moment, his gaze lingering on the baby in her arms, then on the portfolio tucked under her arm. "I'm Ethan Walker," he said, and her heart skipped. The Ethan Walker, the billionaire founder of the company she was begging to work for. "Let's see what you've got." Sarah's knees weakened, but she nodded, her jaw set. She didn't know it then, but that moment, that chance encounter, would change everything. The wind off Lake Michigan howled through the night, rattling the windows of the mansion that no longer felt like home. Sarah Torres sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her daughter Amara asleep in a bassinet beside her. The room was dim lit only by the soft glow of a single lamp and the flickering screen of her ancient laptop. Her fingers moved slowly over the keys, drafting a floor plan for a freelance project, a small community center in a neighborhood that reminded her of the Chicago streets where she'd grown up. The work was tedious, the pay barely enough to cover groceries, but it was hers. It was something Michael couldn't take away. 3 weeks had passed since the hospital, since the moment her world had cracked open like a dropped glass. The divorce papers sat unsigned in a drawer, a quiet rebellion against the life Michael had tried to erase. The $50,000 check lay crumpled in the trash, a symbol of everything she refused to become, someone who could be bought off, silenced with money. She'd spent the first few nights staring at the ceiling, replaying his words, Julia's smug smile, the way the hospital room had seemed to shrink around her. But now anger had given way to something fiercer, resolve. She was a mother now, and Amara deserved a life built on strength, not pity. Sarah stretched her aching fingers, glancing at Amara's tiny form. The baby's chest rose and fell in a rhythm that steadied Sarah's own heartbeat. She leaned over, brushing a soft kiss against Amara's forehead, the scent of baby powder and milk grounding her. "We're going to make it, little one," she whispered. "Just watch." The days blurred into a rhythm of survival. Mornings began with Amara's soft coos, her tiny hands grasping at Sarah's fingers as she prepared bottles with one hand and answered emails with the other. Afternoons were spent hunched over her laptop, sketching designs for clients who paid late or haggled over every cent. Nights were the hardest, when the house grew too quiet, when the emptiness of Michael's absence pressed against her like a physical weight. She'd walk the halls sometimes, tracing the outlines of the life they'd planned, the nursery she'd painted, the dining room where they'd hosted friends, the bedroom where they'd once laughed until dawn. It was all a ghost now, a memory she couldn't afford to linger on. One evening, as snow dusted the windows, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new email. A local nonprofit needed a redesign for a youth center, and they'd seen her portfolio online. The budget was small, but the project was meaningful, a place for kids to feel safe, to dream big. Sarah's heart quickened as she read the brief. This was the kind of work she'd always wanted to do, the kind that could make a difference. She spent the night sketching, her pencil flying across the page, ideas spilling out faster than she could capture them. By dawn, her eyes burned and her coffee was cold, but she had a draft. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers, a small piece of the future she was clawing her way toward. The next morning, Ellen Michael's mother appeared at the door again, this time with a thermos of soup and a knitted blanket for Amara. Sarah opened the door, her hair in a messy bun, her sweatshirt stained with formula. Ellen's eyes softened as she took in the scene, Sarah's tired face, the cluttered living room, the bassinet that never left her side. "You're doing too much," Ellen said, setting the thermos on the counter. "You need to rest, Sarah." Sarah shook her head, managing a faint smile. "Rest is a luxury I don't have right now, but I'm okay. Really." Ellen sat at the kitchen island, her hands folded tightly, as if holding back words she wasn't sure how to say. "He called me yesterday," she said finally, her voice low. "Michael, he's not himself. Julia's got him twisted up, but he'll see it soon enough. He's made a mess of everything." Sarah's chest tightened, but she didn't look up from the bottle she was preparing. "I don't care what he's doing, Ellen. Not anymore." Ellen reached out her hand, resting lightly on Sarah's arm. "I know, and I'm not here to defend him. But I see you, Sarah. I see how hard you're fighting. You're more than he ever deserved. Don't let him make you doubt that." The words hit harder than Sarah expected, a lump rising in her throat. She nodded, blinking back tears, and busied herself with Amara, who was starting to fuss. Ellen stayed for an hour, rocking the baby, while Sarah worked her presence, a quiet anchor in the storm of Sarah's life. When she left, she pressed the blanket into Sarah's hands. "For Amara," she said, "and for you. Keep going." The weeks stretched on, each day a small victory. Sarah landed the youth center project, her designs earning praise from the nonprofit's director. She started taking calls from other clients, her reputation as a freelancer growing, despite the exhaustion that clung to her like a second skin. She learned to work around Amara's schedule, sketching during naps, emailing during feedings, stealing moments of creativity between diaper changes and lullabies. There were nights when she fell asleep at her desk, her cheek pressed against her laptop, only to wake to Amara's cries and start again. One morning, as she bundled Amara into a carrier for a rare trip downtown, Sarah caught her reflection in the hall mirror. Her eyes were shadowed, her cheeks sharper than they'd been a month ago. But there was something new in her face, a fierceness, a spark that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the woman Michael had left, the one who'd begged for answers in that hospital room. She was someone else now, someone who was building something from the ashes. The train to downtown Chicago was crowded, the air thick with the scent of wet coats and coffee. Sarah held Amara close, her portfolio tucked under her arm, her heart pounding, with a mix of nerves and hope. The Walker Tower interview was a long shot, a job she'd applied for, in a moment of reckless optimism. She'd heard of Ethan Walker, the billionaire who'd turned a tech startup into an empire, but she'd never imagined she'd get this far. As the train rattled along, she whispered to Amara, "This could be it, baby girl. This could be our chance." The lobby of Walker Tower was a world apart from the gritty streets outside. Glass walls soared to the ceiling, reflecting the snow that swirled beyond. Sarah felt out of place in her worn coat and scuffed boots, but she squared her shoulders and approached the receptionist, her voice steady as she announced her appointment. The woman smiled, her eyes lingering on Amara, who gurgled happily in her carrier. "Ms. Torres, you're early," the receptionist said. "Take the elevator to the 32nd floor. They're expecting you." Sarah nodded, her stomach churning as she stepped into the elevator. The ride was too quick, the doors opening to a sleek hallway, lined with modern art. She adjusted Amara's carrier, her hands trembling slightly, and took a step forward. Her boot caught on the edge of a rug, and she stumbled, her portfolio slipping from her grasp. Before she could fall, a hand caught her elbow, strong and steady. "Are you okay?" The voice was deep, warm, with a hint of something that made her pause. She looked up, her breath catching. The man was tall, his dark hair flecked with gray, his green eyes sharp but kind. He wore a coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But there was no arrogance in his posture, only a quiet intensity that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in months. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. She adjusted Amara's carrier, meeting his gaze. "I'm here for an interview. I need this job. I can design draft work late, whatever it takes." He studied her for a moment, his eyes flicking to Amara, then to the portfolio now scattered on the floor. He knelt to gather the papers, his movements careful, deliberate. "I'm Ethan Walker," he said, standing and handing her the portfolio. "Let's see what you've got." Sarah's heart stopped. Ethan Walker, the man whose name was on the building, whose company she'd dreamed of working for. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she nodded, clutching her portfolio tighter, and followed him down the hall. Amara cooed softly, oblivious to the weight of the moment, and Sarah felt a surge of determination. This was her chance, not just for a job, but for a new beginning. As they walked, Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "You're a mother," he said, not a question, but an observation. "That's a lot to carry." Sarah lifted her chin, her voice firm. "She's why I'm here. I'm not just carrying her, I'm building a life for her." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, a shadow of pain, but he nodded. "Then let's get started." The interview room was bright, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Sarah sat across from a panel of designers, Ethan, at the head of the table, his presence both intimidating and oddly reassuring. She presented her portfolio, her voice growing stronger with each slide, her passion for design spilling out, despite her nerves. Amara slept through it all, a quiet reminder of why she couldn't fail. When it was over, Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You've got talent, Ms. Torres, and grit. We'll start you on a trial basis. Don't make me regret it." Sarah's breath caught tears pricking her eyes. "You won't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." As she left the building, the snow falling softly around her, Sarah felt something she hadn't in weeks: hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there, warming her, like the sunlight she'd almost forgotten how to chase. Snow clung to the streets of Chicago, turning the city into a mosaic of white and gray. As Sarah Torres stepped off the train, her daughter Amara nestled against her chest in a carrier. The Walker Tower loomed ahead, its glass facade catching the winter light like a beacon. Sarah's boots crunched against the salted sidewalk, her breath visible in the cold air. But inside, her burned a quiet fire. The trial position at Walker Innovations was more than a job. It was a lifeline, a chance to rewrite the story Michael had tried to end in that sterile hospital room. Her portfolio was tucked under her arm, its edges worn, but its contents sharp with ambition. She adjusted Amara's knit cap, the baby's dark eyes blinking up at her, and whispered, "We're doing this, baby girl, for us." The lobby was as intimidating as it had been the first time, all sleek lines and polished surfaces, but Sarah moved with purpose now. She'd spent the past week preparing, refining her designs, staying up late to sketch while Amara slept. The trial period was a gauntlet, and she knew it: every project, every deadline, a test of whether she belonged in a world that felt so far from the one she'd known. As she rode the elevator to the 32nd floor, her heart pounded, But it wasn't just nerves. It was anticipation. She was ready to prove herself. The open-plan office buzzed with quiet energy designers hunched over tablets, their screens glowing with blueprints and renderings. Sarah's desk was a small corner station, a temporary setup that felt like a foothold in a new world. She set Amara's carrier beside her, the baby cooing softly, and opened her laptop. Her first assignment was a residential project, a penthouse redesign for a tech mogul who wanted modern elegance with soul. The brief was vague, the kind of challenge that could make or break a career, but Sarah saw it as an opportunity. She'd spent years designing spaces that told stories, and now she had her own to tell. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, sketching clean lines and warm textures, weaving in elements inspired by her own journey, light-filled spaces that felt like hope, sturdy foundations that spoke of resilience. She worked through lunch, pausing only to feed Amara, her focus unbreakable, even as colleagues cast curious glances her way. They were kind enough, but there was a distance in their smiles, a subtle reminder that she was the new girl, the one with a baby, and a story they didn't yet know. At mid-afternoon, a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up to find Ethan Walker standing there, his green eyes scanning her screen. He wore a navy sweater, the sleeves rolled up revealing forearms that suggested strength beyond the boardroom. There was something disarming about him, a quiet intensity that made her feel both seen and exposed. "Ms. Torres," he said, his voice low but warm. "How's it going?" Sarah straightened, brushing a curl from her face. "It's coming together. I'm playing with light and texture, trying to make the space feel alive, not just luxurious." He nodded, leaning closer to study her screen. His presence was steady, not imposing, but it made her pulse quicken. "You've got a good eye," he said, pointing to a curved accent wall she'd sketched. "This feels personal. What's the story behind it?" She hesitated, caught off guard. Most clients didn't care about the why behind a design, only the result. But Ethan's gaze was patient, expectant, and she found herself answering. "It's about coming through something." The curve softens the space, like it's holding you, like it knows you've been broken, but you're still here. His eyes flickered with something she couldn't name, recognition maybe, or a shadow of his own pain. "That's what good design does," he said. "It tells the truth. Keep going." He walked away, leaving her with a warmth she hadn't expected. Over the next weeks, Ethan became a quiet presence in her days. He didn't hover, didn't micromanage, but he'd appear at her desk with a question or a suggestion, always respectful, always pushing her to dig deeper. He noticed details, the way she integrated sustainable materials, the way she balanced form and function. And his feedback was never patronizing. It was as if he saw her, not just as an employee, but as an artist with something to say. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights began to sparkle beyond the windows, Sarah stayed late, tweaking a rendering for the penthouse project. Amara was asleep in her carrier, a soft blanket tucked around her. The design was nearly complete, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it needed something more, a final touch to make it sing. She hummed softly to herself, a lullaby her mother used to sing her pencil sketching, absent-mindedly, as she thought. The door to the office opened, and Ethan stepped in, a takeout bag in hand. He paused, his eyes softening as he took in the scene: Sarah at her desk, Amara sleeping, the faint melody filling the quiet. "You're still here," he said, setting the bag on a nearby table. "I figured you might be hungry." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." He shrugged, pulling out a container of stir-fry and 2 plastic forks. "I was grabbing something for myself. Thought you could use it too." Long hours with a baby can't be easy." She hesitated, then accepted the fork, her stomach rumbling at the scent of soy and ginger. They ate in companionable silence, the city humming below. It was the first time in weeks she'd shared a meal with anyone, and the simple act felt like a small gift. "You're good at this," Ethan said after a moment, gesturing to her screen. "The penthouse design, it's not just beautiful. It's honest. That's rare." Sarah's cheeks warmed, and she ducked her head. "I'm just trying to keep up. This place, it's a lot." He leaned back, studying her. "You're doing more than keeping up. You're standing out. Why do you think I hired you?" She laughed softly, a little self-conscious. "Because I almost fell on my face in the hallway." His smile was small, but genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Because you didn't let that stop you. You've got fire, Sarah. I saw it the moment you walked in." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, easing the ache she'd carried since Michael's betrayal. She wanted to say something to thank him, but Amara stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Sarah reached for her, instinctively lifting the baby to her shoulder, swaying gently as she hummed. Ethan watched, his expression unreadable, but there was a weight to his gaze, a quiet reverence that made her heart skip. "I lost someone," he said suddenly, his voice so low she almost missed it. "My wife. She didn't make it after childbirth. Seeing you with your daughter, it's like seeing a piece of what I lost." Sarah's breath caught her arms, tightening around Amara. She didn't know what to say, how to bridge the gap between her pain and his. "I'm so sorry," she said finally, her voice soft. "That must be unbearable." He nodded, his eyes distant. "It was. Sometimes it still is. But you're building something new. That's what keeps me going too." The moment hung between them, fragile and heavy, until Amara's soft coos broke the silence. Sarah smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "She's my reason," she said. "Everything I do, it's for her." Ethan's gaze softened, and he stood gathering the empty containers. "Get some rest, Sarah. You're going to need it for what's coming." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sarah's penthouse design was approved, earning praise from the client, and a quiet nod from Ethan that felt like a victory. She threw herself into new projects, each one a chance to prove she belonged. Her colleagues began to warm to her, their initial wariness giving way to respect as they saw her work. She was no longer just the single mom with the baby in tow. She was Sarah Torres, the architect who brought soul to steel and glass. One morning, as she presented her final renderings for the youth center project she'd taken on freelance, the director called her personally. "Your design won the Humanitarian Design Award." The woman said, her voice bright with excitement. "It's inspired, Sarah. It's like you've poured your heart into every line." Sarah hung up her hands, shaking. She looked at Amara, who was chewing on a teething ring, and laughed through tears. "We did it, baby," she whispered. "We're making it." That evening, Ethan found her in the office, staring at the award announcement on her phone. He leaned against her desk, his arms crossed. "I heard the news," he said, a rare smile breaking through. "You're not just good, Sarah. You're exceptional." She met his gaze, her heart full. "Thank you," she said, and for the first time, she felt the words weren't enough. Ethan hadn't just given her a job. He'd given her a chance to believe in herself again, to see a future beyond the wreckage Michael had left behind. As she left the office that night, Amara asleep in her carrier, Sarah felt the weight of the past easing just a little. The city sparkled below its lights, a promise of something new. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to find out. The Chicago skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Walker Innovations, a tapestry of steel and light that seemed to pulse with possibility. Sarah Torres sat at her desk now, a permanent fixture in the open-plan office, her fingers dancing across her tablet as she refined a new project, a community library designed to feel like a sanctuary for the city's overlooked neighborhoods. Amara, now 6 months old, gurgled in a portable playpen beside her, her tiny hands clutching a soft toy, her laughter a melody that softened the edges of Sarah's long hours. The past months had been a crucible forging her into someone new, someone who no longer flinched at the memory of Michael's betrayal. She was an architect, a mother, a woman who had clawed her way back from the abyss, and every line she drew felt like a declaration of that truth. The office hummed with the quiet rhythm of deadlines, but Sarah had found her place in it. Her colleagues no longer glanced at Amara with curiosity or pity. They nodded to Sarah in the halls, sought her input on designs, even asked about her daughter's latest milestones. The Humanitarian Design Award for the Youth Center had shifted something not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving her work, a bridge between the pain of her past and the hope of her future. Ethan Walker had become a constant in her days, his presence as steady as the city's heartbeat. He didn't linger, didn't crowd her, but his feedback was a compass, guiding her toward bolder choices. He'd stop by her desk with a quiet question or a suggestion that always felt like an invitation to push further, to trust her instincts. There was a respect in his gaze that made her feel seen, not as a single mother or a betrayed wife, but as an artist with a voice. It was a gift she hadn't realized she'd been starving for. One evening, as the office grew quiet and the sky outside deepened to indigo, Sarah stayed late putting the final touches on the library design. Amara was asleep in her playpen, her soft breaths a counterpoint to the hum of Sarah's laptop. The project was ambitious open spaces flooded with natural light reading nooks that felt like embraces a rooftop garden where kids could dream under the stars. It was personal, inspired by the libraries where Sarah had escaped as a child, her refuge from a world that hadn't always been kind. She hummed softly, a habit she'd picked up to soothe Amara, her pencil sketching a final detail, a skylight shaped like a crescent moon. The door to the office opened, and Sarah glanced up to see Ethan, his coat draped over one arm, a thermos of coffee in his hand. His hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his fingers through it, and his green eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. "You're burning the midnight oil again," he said, setting the thermos on her desk. "Thought you might need this." Sarah smiled, her fingers pausing on the tablet. "You're going to spoil me with all this caffeine." He chuckled, a low, easy sound that felt like a rare glimpse of the man behind the billionaire. "Consider it an investment in your brilliance. That library design, it's something special." She flushed, tucking a curl behind her ear. "It's personal. I wanted it to feel like a place where anyone could belong, no matter where they come from." He leaned closer, studying the screen. "You've got a gift for that, Sarah. Making spaces that hold people together. It's not just design, it's storytelling." The words settled over her, warm and grounding. She glanced at Amara, then back at Ethan, her voice soft. "I learned that from being a mother, I think. You build a world for someone you love, even when it's just the two of you." His gaze softened, and for a moment, he seemed far away, lost in a memory. "That's what she did," he said, almost to himself. "My wife. She built a world for our daughter, even when she knew she wouldn't be there to see it." Sarah's heart ached at the rawness in his voice. She knew about his loss, the wife who hadn't survived childbirth, the daughter who had. It was a wound he carried quietly, but in moments like this, It bled through. What was her name? She asked, her voice gentle. Clara, he said the word heavy with love and grief. She was everything. She'd have liked you, Sarah. Your strength, your heart. The air between them felt fragile, charged with unspoken things. Sarah wanted to reach out to bridge the gap between their pain, but Amara stirred, letting out a soft whimper. She moved to the playpen, lifting her daughter and cradling her close, the familiar weight grounding her. She swayed gently, humming that same lullaby, and when she looked up, Ethan was watching, his eyes glistening in the dim light. "You're a natural," he said, his voice thick. "Seeing you with her, it reminds me of what I lost, but it also makes me believe in second chances." Sarah's throat tightened, and she blinked back tears. "I didn't think I'd believe in those again," she admitted. "Not after everything." He stepped closer, his presence warm, steady. "You're building one right now, Sarah. For her, for yourself." The moment stretched heavy with possibility, until Amara's soft coos broke the spell. Sarah laughed softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "She's got terrible timing," she said, and Ethan's smile returned soft and real. "Get some rest," he said, picking up his coat. "You're going to need it for the presentation tomorrow." The library project was a triumph. The client, a city council member with a passion for community spaces, called Sarah's Design a love letter to Chicago. It earned her a permanent contract at Walker Innovations, a raise and a reputation as the firm's rising star. Her colleagues celebrated with her, their earlier distance replaced by camaraderie. They brought cupcakes to the office, toasted her with cheap wine, and even took turns holding Amara, who giggled at the attention. For the first time, Sarah felt like she belonged not just to the job, but to the life she was carving out. But it was Ethan's quiet pride that stayed with her. He didn't join the office party, but he stopped by her desk the next day, a single white rose in his hand. For the star of the show, he said, his voice low. "You're changing the game, Sarah." She took the rose, her fingers brushing his, a spark of warmth passing between them. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said, meaning it. "You saw something in me when I wasn't sure I saw it myself." His eyes held hers, steady and sure. "I still see it, every day." The weeks that followed were a blur of new projects and late nights. Sarah threw herself into her work, designing spaces that felt like extensions of her heart, a women's shelter with soft lighting and sturdy walls, a school with classrooms that invited curiosity. Each project was a step toward the future, a way to prove to herself and to Amara that they could build something beautiful from the ruins of the past. One night, as spring began to thaw, the city, Sarah stayed late again, working on a pro bono project for a local arts center. Amara was asleep, her playpen tucked beside the desk, and the office was silent except for the hum of the city beyond. Sarah was sketching a mural wall, vibrant and bold, when Ethan appeared, his silhouette framed by the doorway. "You're relentless," he said, a teasing edge to his voice. He carried a takeout bag, the scent of Thai curry wafting through the air. "Thought you might need dinner." She laughed, setting her pencil down. "You're going to make me think you're stalking me." He grinned, setting the bag on her desk. "Maybe I just like the company." They ate together, the conversation easy flowing from design to music to the small joys of Amara's latest milestones. It was the kind of moment Sarah hadn't realized she'd been missing, a connection that felt effortless, unburdened by expectation. As they finished, Ethan leaned back, his eyes tracing her face. "You've changed since you started here," he said. "Not just your work. You're lighter." She considered that, twirling the rose he'd given her weeks ago, now pressed and dried in her notebook. "I'm finding my way," she said. It's not easy, but it's mine. Amara's mine. This life, it's mine. He nodded, his gaze steady. You're doing more than finding your way, Sarah. You're building something extraordinary. The words lingered as he left the office, falling quiet again. Sarah looked at Amara, at the city lights beyond, and felt a shift inside her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was creating not just spaces, but a life that felt like it belonged to her. And for the first time, she let herself wonder if there might be room in that life for something more, for someone who saw her not as a victim or a mother, but as a woman who could light up the world. As she packed up to leave, Amara's soft snores filling the air, Sarah smiled. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time it felt like it might lead somewhere bright. The Chicago courthouse loomed like a fortress of stone, its gray facade unyielding, under a sky heavy with April clouds. Sarah Torres stood outside, her hands trembling as she adjusted the strap of Amara's carrier, the baby's warmth a steady anchor against her chest. The past months had been a tapestry of triumphs: her permanent role at Walker Innovations, the Humanitarian Design Award, the quiet moments with Ethan that felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. But today, none of that mattered. Today was about fighting for her daughter, for the life she'd built from the ashes of Michael's betrayal. The custody hearing was a battle she hadn't expected, a wound reopened just when she'd begun to heal. Inside the courtroom was a sterile expanse of polished wood and muted voices, the air thick with tension. Sarah sat at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, who'd taken the case pro bono, flipping through documents beside her. Amara was with Ellen, Michael's mother, in the waiting area, a small mercy that allowed Sarah to focus. She wore a simple navy blazer, her curls pulled back, her face bare except for a touch of lip gloss. She didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but she needed to look like she belonged, like she was enough. Across the room, Michael sat with his lawyer. His once confident posture diminished. His suit was wrinkled, his blonde hair thinning at the temples, his eyes shadowed with something that might have been regret, but felt too late. Julia was gone. Sarah had heard left him when his real estate empire crumbled under bad investments and worse decisions. He'd lost his penthouse, his reputation, and now it seemed he wanted the one thing he'd discarded without a second thought: their daughter. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and a no-nonsense gaze, called the session to order. Sarah's heart pounded, her fingers twisting in her lap as Michael's lawyer stood, his voice smooth and cutting. Your Honor, my client seeks joint custody of his daughter, Amara Torres. Mr. Stur Anderson is a successful businessman with the resources to provide a stable environment. Ms. Torres, while undoubtedly dedicated, is a single mother with limited financial means, working long hours in a demanding field. We question her ability to provide the stability a child needs. The words were a blade slicing through Sarah's carefully built confidence. She felt the eyes of the room on her, the weight of judgment pressing down. Karen leaned close, her voice a whisper. Stay calm. We've got this. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight, but the doubt crept in. She wasn't rich, not like Michael had been. Her apartment was small, her bank account stretched thin, her days a juggling act of work and motherhood. But she'd never left Amara, not for a single night, not even when exhaustion made her vision blur. She'd built a life for her daughter, stitch by stitch, and no one could take that away. When it was her turn, Karen called her to the stand. Sarah stood, her knees unsteady but her spine straight, and walked to the witness box. The room felt too small, the air too thin, but she met the judge's gaze, her voice steady as she swore the oath. Karen's questions were gentle guiding, drawing out the story of the past year. Sarah's work, her sacrifices, the love that drove her every choice. Ms. Torres. Karen said, her tone warm but firm. Can you tell the court what your days look like? With Amara. Sarah took a breath, her hands clasped tightly. I wake up at 5 to feed her, to spend those quiet moments before the world starts. I work designing spaces, building things that matter, because I want her to grow up knowing she can do anything. I'm there for every feeding, every diaper change, every smile. I stay up late sketching so I can be with her during the day. I'm not perfect, and I don't have a mansion or a trust fund, but I have never, not once, left her side. She's my world. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she blinked back tears, refusing to let them fall. The judge's expression softened, but Michael's lawyer stood, his smile sharp. Ms. Torres, you work long hours, often late into the night, correct? How can you claim to provide stability when you're stretched so thin? Or Anderson can offer financial security, a comfortable home, things a child needs. Sarah's chest tightened, anger flaring alongside fear. Money isn't love, she said, her voice low but fierce. I may not have millions, but I've given her everything, every moment, every dream, every piece of me. Michael walked away the day she was born. He chose someone else, something else. He doesn't get to come back now, because he's lost everything else. The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but a murmur rippled through the courtroom as the door opened. Sarah turned, her breath catching, as Ethan Walker stepped inside his presence, commanding the room without effort. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair flecked with gray, his green eyes steady as they met hers. He carried a leather briefcase, his stride purposeful, as he approached the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice calm but resonant. I request permission to speak as a character witness for Ms. Torres. The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded. Proceed, Mr. Walker. Ethan took the stand, his gaze never leaving Sarah's as he swore the oath. Karen stepped forward, her voice steady. Mr. Walker, can you tell the court about your professional relationship with Ms. Torres? I'm the CEO of Walker Innovations. Ethan began, his tone even but warm. I hired Sarah 8 months ago, initially on a trial basis. She's now one of our tulip architects, responsible for award-winning designs that have elevated our firm's reputation. She's not just talented, she's relentless, creative, and principled. She works hard not for herself, but for her daughter. I've seen her balance motherhood and a demanding career with a strength most people couldn't muster. Michael's lawyer stood, his voice sharp. Mr. Walker, with all due respect, Ms. Torres's financial situation is precarious. Can you confirm she has the resources to provide for a child? Ethan's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. I can confirm that Sarah Torres is one of the most capable people I've ever met. She's built a career from nothing, under circumstances that would break most. She doesn't need wealth to be a good mother. She has something far more valuable: character. And if the court requires a guarantor for her stability, I'll stand for her, personally. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over everyone. Sarah's heart pounded, tears prickling her eyes, not from fear, but from gratitude. Ethan wasn't just defending her, he was standing in the fire with her, offering a piece of himself to protect her daughter. Michael's lawyer faltered, his arguments crumbling under the weight of Ethan's conviction. The judge called a recess, and Sarah stepped outside to find Ellen waiting with Amara. The older woman's eyes were red, but she smiled as she handed the baby to Sarah. You were incredible in there, Ellen said, her voice thick. I'm so sorry for what he's putting you through. Sarah cradled Amara, the baby's warmth easing the ache in her chest. He can't take her, she said, her voice fierce. "I won't let him." When the court reconvened, the judge's ruling was swift. "Ms. Torres has demonstrated exceptional dedication to her daughter," she said, her voice clear. "Mr. Anderson's absence during the child's early months, combined with Ms. Torres's proven stability, leads me to grant full custody to Ms. Torres, with visitation rights for Mr. Anderson at the court's discretion." Sarah's knees buckled, relief flooding her like a tidal wave. Karen squeezed her hand, and across the room, Michael slumped, his head bowed. For a moment, she felt a pang of pity, but it passed. He'd made his choices, and she'd made hers. Outside the courthouse, Ethan found her, his expression softer now, almost hesitant. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, tears spilling over as she held Amara close. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You didn't have to do that." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm, a touch that felt like a promise. "I did," he said, "because you're worth it, both of you." The clouds parted, a sliver of sunlight breaking through, and Sarah felt something shift inside her, a weight lifting, a door opening. She'd fought for Amara, for herself, and she'd won. And as Ethan stood beside her, his presence steady and sure, she dared to believe that this victory was only the beginning. The New York Design Expo glowed under a canopy of golden lights, its grand hall a symphony of creativity and ambition. Sarah Torres stood at the edge of the stage, her heart racing as the crowd buzzed below their voices, a soft hum against the clink of champagne glasses. A year had passed since the courtroom victory that had secured Amara's place in her arms, a year of rebuilding, of discovering the woman she was becoming. Tonight, she was no longer just the single mother fighting to prove herself. She was Sarah Torres, architect visionary, and according to the program in every attendee's hand, a nominee for Architect of the Year. Amara, now a lively toddler, with her mother's curls and a smile that could melt stone, was with Ellen back in Chicago, safe and loved. Sarah wore a sleek emerald dress that hugged her curves, her brown skin radiant under the stage lights, her eyes bright with a confidence she'd earned through every sleepless night and hard-won triumph. The past year had been a whirlwind of growth. Her work at Walker Innovations had flourished, her designs, libraries, shelters, community spaces earning accolades for their blend of beauty and humanity. The library she'd poured her heart into had become a beacon in Chicago, a place where children read under crescent moon skylights, and families found solace in spaces that felt like home. Each project was a piece of her story, a testament to the life she'd built for herself and Amara. But it was the quiet moments with Ethan Walker that had begun to redefine her heart's edges, softening the scars Michael had left behind. Ethan had been there through it all, not as a savior, but as a partner, his presence a steady hand in the chaos of her days. Tonight, the expo hall was alive with possibility, its walls lined with models and renderings from the world's top architects. Sarah's latest project, a women's center, designed to feel like a sanctuary, was displayed near the center, its clean lines and warm textures drawing a steady stream of admirers. She'd named it Sunlit Haven, a nod to the light she'd found in her own darkness, and the response had been overwhelming. Colleagues stopped to congratulate her, their praise genuine, their respect hard-earned. But as the ceremony began, her nerves tightened, a flutter of anticipation mingling with the weight of the moment. The host, a silver-haired architect with a voice like velvet, took the stage, his words weaving through the crowd. "Tonight, we honor those who shape our world, not just with steel and glass, but with vision and heart. Our final award, Architect of the Year, goes to someone whose work has redefined what it means to build spaces that heal. Sarah Torres." The room erupted in applause, and Sarah's breath caught her hands trembling as she walked to the stage. The spotlight was warm, almost tangible, and she gripped the podium, her eyes scanning the sea of faces. She'd prepared a speech, but the words felt distant now, overshadowed by the rush of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you." She began, her voice steady, despite the tears pricking her eyes. "This award isn't just mine. It's for my daughter Amara, who taught me that love is the strongest foundation. It's for the people who believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. And it's for every woman who's ever had to rebuild her life from nothing. We don't just survive, we create." The crowd rose to their feet, their cheers washing over her like a tide. As she stepped off the stage, her heart full, she saw Ethan waiting at the edge of the crowd. He wore a tailored black suit, his green eyes bright with pride, a bouquet of white roses in his hand. He moved toward her, his stride sure, and when he reached her, he handed her the flowers, his smile soft, but electric. "You were incredible," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. "I knew you'd steal the show." Sarah laughed, the sound lighter than she'd ever thought possible. "I was terrified. But thank you. For everything." He shook his head, his gaze holding hers. "You don't need to thank me, Sarah. You did this. You built this moment." The crowd swirled around them, but for Sarah, the world narrowed to the man in front of her. Ethan had been her ally, her confidant, the one who'd seen her potential when she'd been too broken to see it herself. Their connection had grown slowly, rooted in shared moments, late-night dinners in the office, quiet conversations about loss and hope, the way his hand lingered when he passed her a coffee. It wasn't just gratitude she felt now, but something deeper, something that made her heart ache with possibility. As the evening wound down, the hall emptied, leaving only a scattering of guests and the soft glow of the lights. Sarah and Ethan stood by her display, the roses cradled in her arms, their fragrance mingling with the crisp air. "You've changed everything," Ethan said, his voice quiet, but sure. "Not just for yourself, but for me. Watching you, it's made me believe I can start again too." Sarah's breath hitched, her eyes searching his. She knew his story, the wife he'd lost, the daughter he raised alone, the grief that had shaped him as surely as her own had shaped her. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "you've given me so much. A chance, a place to belong. I don't know how to repay that." He stepped closer, his hand brushing hers, a spark of warmth in the cool night. "You already have," he said. "You've shown me what it means to keep going, to love, even when it hurts. I thought I'd lost that, Sarah. But you make me want to try again." Her heart pounded, tears welling as she looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who'd stood by her in the courtroom, who'd celebrated her victories, who'd seen her at her most vulnerable and never looked away. Before she could speak, a small voice broke the moment, bright and clear. Mama Sarah turned to see Amara toddling toward her, Ellen trailing behind with a sheepish smile. The toddler's curls bounced, her eyes wide with excitement as she reached for Sarah. "Mama win," she chirped, her tiny hands clapping. Sarah laughed, scooping her daughter into her arms, the roses pressed between them. "Yes, baby, Mama won," she said, kissing Amara's forehead. She glanced at Ellen, who nodded, her eyes warm with approval. Amara's gaze shifted to Ethan, her face lighting up. "Chew, Ethan," she said, reaching for him. "Mama say you best." Sarah's cheeks flushed, but Ethan's laugh was warm, unguarded. He took Amara's hand, his fingers gentle. "Your mama's pretty smart," he said. his eyes meeting Sarah's, a question in them. Ellen stepped forward, her voice soft. "I'll take her back to the hotel, Sarah. You enjoy your night." She winked, a knowing glint in her eye, and guided Amara away, leaving Sarah and Ethan alone. The hall was quiet now, the lights casting a golden glow over the displays. Ethan stepped closer, his hand finding hers, his touch light but deliberate. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I've spent a long time running from what I lost, but standing here with you, I don't want to run anymore." Her breath caught her heart a wild rhythm. She'd spent so long guarding herself, protecting the life she'd built for Amara, that she'd almost forgotten how to let someone in. But Ethan wasn't Michael. He wasn't a man who'd break her. He was the one who'd stood beside her, who'd seen her strength and her scars, and called them beautiful. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't want to run either." He smiled, a slow, radiant thing, and lifted her hand, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was soft, reverent, and it sent a shiver through her, the lights above them blurring through her tears. "Then let's not run," he said. "Let's see where this takes us." The world seemed to hold its breath as they stood there, hands entwined, the city sparkling beyond the windows. Sarah felt the weight of her past, lift not gone, but lighter a shadow that no longer defined her. She was a mother, an architect, a woman who'd learned to love herself again, and now maybe she could learn to love someone else. As they left the hall, the night air cool against their skin, the camera of her mind's eye pulled back, capturing them under the golden lights, a new chapter beginning. The skyline stretched before them, vast and alive, a testament to what could be built from broken things. And as they walked into the future side by side, a quiet truth settled over her. Love didn't come when everything was perfect. It came when you dared to believe you were worthy of it again.